God, we thank you for, Lord God, we thank you for our speaker today, for the message that we're going to receive, the information. We're thankful that the ones that are attending are well. We thank you for keeping us during this time, and it's been very difficult. And Lord God, we just thank you for all of our many gifts, our health, our strength, and anything that we can learn to do better. Now we just pray for the furtherance of this program. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Amen. And then Tony Massoud, I will turn it over to you because I think you have the goods on the speaker. If we have
Yes.
All right.
Well, we have a speaker, but we also have some guests. I would like Clint and Karen to introduce yourselves. Karen?
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Clint Rose, formerly with the Kroger Company and retired now.
Clint's a good friend of ours, yes. Karen?
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Vi. I'm Director of Adult and Family Services at East End Community Services. I was a speaker a couple weeks ago and was graciously invited to come back, and I really appreciate it. Nice group of people, and it's nice to be involved in some type of an organization or group again. So thank you. I'm glad I'm here.
Thank you. Is Micah on? Okay, Mike, are you on? Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Fletcher. He's going to give us advice and suggestions regarding pandemics. And here's the short bio I sent on Dr. Fletcher. He's a good friend of mine. He's involved in many things. For many years, he's been in research way back when AIDS was there. He was the Ohio health director. Doctor, I'm going to turn it over to you since you have so much to offer, and we're anxious to hear your program.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Tony. And it's a pleasure to be here with this group. I wanted to talk about three aspects of what's going on with regard to the pandemic: origins, variants, and vaccines. Those seem to be the major topics that people are discussing, and there's a lot of controversy regarding. I'd like to start off by saying that if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to let me know. And certainly I want to leave time at the end to answer any of the questions, such as the questions that were raised before I started this discussion. So let's start by talking about a scenario. So what if at NIH, their virology lab, which is the highest standard, the highest security, the highest rated lab in the world, what happened if, let's say, someone went into a storage room and they found a box with a bunch of tubes in it? The tubes had something in it, but he didn't know what they were. But he was trying to clean out that storage space. And so he took these tubes, put them in a shoebox, and went outside and marched across Washington to the site where these things were to be taken. Now, then let's say we find out that what's in the tubes is very dangerous, very virulent, very deadly. Well, that's not a make-up scenario. That actually happened at the NIH. Someone went into a room, they found what they thought were just discarded samples of some sort, not knowing that these were extremely dangerous and deadly smallpox containing tubes. And he went outside with these tubes in a shoebox. Had they had one of them broken and that been released, it could have killed half the population of Washington, D.C., not to mention had it got out of Washington, D.C. So I bring this example to say that accidents can happen. And regardless of how strong your security is, how strong your procedures are, accidents can happen. And you can't be prepared for anything to happen. Now, with that, I'd like to introduce the topics of origins. So a lot of people feel that the COVID virus began with a natural phenomenon. We know that COVID has been normally found in bats, but it has not been able to transfer from bats to humans. But for some reason, back in 2019, it did. Other people are saying that this just doesn't make any sense. They believe that this was created in a lab and that a lab accident allowed it to spread. Now, they base this on the fact that there was a scientist at Wuhan Virology Institute, and that is the highest rated security, safety institution for virology in China. It's the #1 area for them to do research of this time. Now, they had a physician named Dr. Shi Zhengli, who they called the bat lady, because she did a lot of research on bat viruses. And she has stated that it could not have come from her lab. It doesn't make any sense. She has several hundred people working in her lab. And throughout the Orient, there are millions and millions of interactions between bats and humans. And so it seems more likely that it happened naturally. Now, how can a lab cause something like this? Well, we have to understand that there is a area of study called gain of function. And gain of function are basically techniques to enhance the pathogenicity of certain viruses through gene editing or some sort of special passage of a pathogen through some in-between creature. In other words, they're trying to change the nature of the virus in hopes of finding out what could happen if this virus spread into humans, and to find out how can we protect ourselves and what drugs can we develop to prevent that from happening or preventing death. But it's basically manipulating viruses so that they have the potential to transfer from that animal population to humans. Now, let's kind of look at the governmental structure and what has happened with that. Well, 8 years ago, Dr. Collins, who was head of NIH, and Dr. Fauci, who was director of allergy and infectious disease, they developed and became the lead federal funders for gain of function research. And they developed a committee to review and to make sure safeguards were in place so that accidents would not happen. And they actually called this the Ferret Committee. And the reason why they called it the Ferret Committee was at that time, they were doing research to see if a ferret type of flu could pass to humans, because it could be very, very dangerous and deadly. And so they wanted to make sure that there were safeguards in place. And I said, that was several years ago, 8 years ago. Recently, the policy has been undercut, and that committee's authority has been reduced significantly. In 2017, the committee had its ability to stop these projects taken away from it. And the NIH has given a lot of approvals to projects without the committee's permission. And these projects have been essentially under the radar because this committee has now gotten to the point in which there's a lot of secrecy. They don't have an agenda. The meetings are held in secret. People don't even know who's now a member of these committees. And so it's under that type of authorization that all of these potential gain of studies activities have occurred. There have been a lot of lot of uproar about gain of function. A lot of people say the risk is far greater than the benefits. But again, there are so many scientists that want to find out. And so at first, Collins, who headed the NIH, and others were talking about, well, you know, he believes it was a natural occurrence, this bat and human interaction, and that's how it occurred, and didn't occur at the lab. However, that was when he was in office. Now that he no longer holds that position, he is saying that the possibility of a lab leak is certainly something that needs to be investigated. So it's funny how change of positions can change your ideas and your thinking. Now, between 2012 and 2020, over 18 projects based on gain of function were approved. And these were given over 13 different sites in various areas, not only in the country, but in the world. And the amount of money was almost $50 million to do this research. And the committee approved these. And again, they approved them in secrecy. So we don't really know what they were doing. We do know that there are and there have been instances in which viruses have naturally occurred. The original SARS from back in 2002, that was associated with a bird to man transmission. The original MERS back in 2012, that appeared to be camels to humans. And there have been a number of circumstances in which we've seen this happen, but we've also seen a lot of accidental releases of viruses. And as a matter of fact, there have been releases from Chinese laboratories. One release caused the death of one individual and the need for 600 other individuals being quarantined. So there's also information about the fact that we have been working with bird flu. Rotterdam in the Netherlands and the University of Wisconsin have been working on an altered type of bird flu. And I'm very concerned about bird flu because although COVID appears to be easier to go into humans and bird flu is not, COVID has a mortality rate of about 15%. Bird flu has a mortality rate of 50%. 1 out of every 2 people that contracts bird flu will die. And this has been altered to become an airborne virus. And so it can go from people to humans. And I really am concerned about that because there's so much interaction between humans and poultry, birds. And in one of the former questions, someone asked me, well, aren't bats birds? And in fact, bats are not birds. They're actually part of the mammalian family. They're kind of like rats with wings. So basically, we're at a point in which if we are at higher risk, should there be a higher transparency associated with this? I have worked a lot with scientists from China and India. And during the early days, I had contacted them and I was kind of concerned about gain of function. And I asked what happened. Now, unfortunately, a lot of those scientists are no longer available for comment and have been quashed, I don't know, they've just kind of dropped off the radar. But what I was told is that at the Wuhan Institute, they were doing gain of function studies to try to find out if these bat viruses could transmit to humans. Well, they weren't able to be able to find out if it went directly into humans. So they had to have a mammal intermediary. And the intermediary that they used is something called a pangolin. And a pangolin is the only mammal that has scaled skin over its entire body. And so in the Orient, it is considered to be a magical medicinal product. And so they can pay as much as $300 a kilo for a pangolin. And pangolins can weigh up to 70 pounds. So I was also told that the laboratory workers were poorly trained and poorly paid. From that, I was told that these laboratory workers, in order to make extra money, had taken these pangolins that had been contaminated, taken them to the Wuhan wet market, which is an area in which they sell fairly fresh fish and other types of animals. And they took those infected pangolins to that market. And, you know, interesting. Guess where the COVID virus is supposed to have originated? The Wuhan wet market. And so is there any validity to this? Well, I can't say for sure. Certainly it could be a natural circumstance, but things just don't seem to add up very well. So that's what I have to say about the origin of the disease. And I'd like to say, does anyone have any questions regarding that? Okay, well, hearing none, let's turn our attention to variants. Now, how do these variants develop? And viruses and other organisms are always looking for a survival advantage. And the survival advantage for viruses is to be able to infect more people. The more people that are infected, the longer that virus can live and multiply. And how viruses live and multiply is that, well, they don't actually live. They're not officially living creatures, but they invade cells and they take over the mechanism of the cells and use that cell's mechanism to make reproductions of themselves. And they can do this thousands and thousands and thousands of times a minute. So many copies are made, and eventually these copies overtake the cell and kill it. So it's a rapid mutation that's associated with all of these rapid copying. And a good example is, and I've done it a lot of times, if you have your cell phone and you're texting a long piece very quickly, you're going to see that you've made mistakes. And those mistakes can alter what your message says. Last night, my wife sent me a message about getting something from the store. And I read it, I said, said something about bird cage. And I said, what's bird cage? And when I asked her, she said, no, I actually meant Bernese sauce. But the spell check and a spelling error caused a significant change. And that's what happens with these variants. Because we work on base pairs, because there are certain alphabetic orders that need to be made. If you drop a number, mismatch a number, then what you have is different from the original. And that's how variants occur. Now, there have been a number of variants that have occurred with regard to COVID. So in December of 2019, we had the original COVID virus. In November of 2020, we had the alpha virus. We had the beta virus late in 2020. We had the gamma virus in January of 2021. We had the Delta virus in December of 2020. We had the Mu virus in January of 2021. We've had the Omicron virus, which actually was first noted around November of 2021. And certainly there is a gap between Delta and Mu. So Epsilon and so many others, these are variants that were seen, but they were short-lived and really didn't have any significant change in what was going on. So the Omicron variant, that has become the predominant variant in this country. Remember, it wasn't too long ago we were talking about how Delta was so bad and how transmittable it was. Now it is Omicron. And just to show you how serious Omicron transmission is, on December 4th of 2021, it was evaluated that Omicron represented less than 1%, 0.6%, 0.6%, less than 1% of the cases of COVID in the country. December 4th. On January 1st of this year, less than a month later, it now represents 99.5% of the infections of COVID in this country. So again, Omicron is taking advantage of that survival advantage. If it can change in order to transmit more and to build its population more, it has a survival advantage. Now, a lot of people talk about, does this translate to being more lethal? Well, there are a number of studies to suggest that Omicron may not be as lethal as other forms, but just more contagious, although we are still seeing a lot of deaths due to Omicron. But that's probably because there's so many more people that are being infected. And so because of that larger pool, one could expect a larger number of deaths. But Omicron is bad enough. And we talked about politics. Well, mu was the last Greek alphabet. And after mu comes nu and then Z. So why wasn't this called nu or Z and they skipped to Omicron? It was because of political reasons. They didn't want to call it new because they were afraid that people would assume that it's an NEW, a new type of virus. And they didn't want to concern the public with regard to that. Why didn't they call it Z? Well, because the president of China's first name is Z, and they didn't want to upset that circumstance. And so they skipped those two alphabets to Omicron. Politically motivated. Interesting. So Omicron has a significant transmittability, and we hope that Omicron is where it stops. However, we've already discovered that not only are there these major variants, there are subvariants. And we have already discovered that there are 4 different subvariants of Omicron. And at this time, we're trying to study those to find out, are they more transmittable? Are they more serious, more dangerous? Things change so quickly, we just don't know. But as long as we have to take a look at the long term of things, as long as there are people that are unvaccinated, then that increases the ability of the virus to spread. And because this is a pandemic, just because the United States is fairly well protected with vaccinations doesn't really help. Remember, Omicron came from South Africa, and Africa has been woefully underserved with regard to vaccination. So because it's a pandemic, if anywhere in the world a variant develops, it's eventually going to get here. That's what's happened. Most of these variants have not occurred, have not originated in the United States. Only one variant to this point has originated in the United States, and that was the Epsilon. But the Epsilon was fairly short-lived and didn't really have any significant survival advantages, so it just kind of disappeared. But the Alpha variant was from England, and then other variants were from Peru and Colombia and Africa, and of course, China. So variants are here and variants are going to continue. And as long as we have a portion of the population in which those viruses can spread and multiply, those changes are going to occur. And because those changes occur, then we're going to have variants. And God help us if we get a variant that is extremely transmittable, resistant to being detected by any of our tests, and far more deadly than what we've seen at this point. So again, that kind of explains variants. And I'd like to, again, open the floor. If there are any questions, feel free. Now, vaccines. Vaccines have been shown to be very, very effective. And regardless of what the web conspiracy people say, vaccines are safe and effective. Billions of people have received the vaccines. and we've seen very, very little serious side effect, and we've seen it become very, very effective. Probably the reason why we only have, and regrettably, only 800,000 people dying. That's a significant number and a sorrowful number. But because of vaccines and its protection, we have far less deaths than we could have had. We should be, without a vaccine, we would have millions. It would be the Spanish flu all over again. We would have millions of individuals that are dead, but the vaccines protect us. One other thing I wanted to mention about vaccines, we hear about these people who are getting reinfected that have already been vaccinated. Well, that's because if you look at the outcome goals of vaccines, it's not to prevent you from getting the virus, it's to prevent you from becoming severely ill or dying from the virus. And we can also see that information in our current studies. And we see that the overwhelming majority of individuals who are dying from COVID, from the Omicron variant, are those individuals who are unvaccinated or undervaccinated. Certainly, people that are fully vaccinated that have immune suppressed disorders, meaning their immune systems don't have the ability to fight off things. And so vaccines are less effective in protecting them. But other than that, the vaccines are extremely protective. And we actually have research to tell us to what extent. So if you look at one dose, that provides a 52% reduction. And that's basically for hospitalizations or severe disease. 2 doses, it bumps it up to 72% effectiveness. 3 doses, almost 90% effectiveness. Now, the people in Israel had been looking at a possibility of a 4th dose because of the severity of Omicron. And they have done their research and they found that a 4th dose really has no bearing on making any changes of that. The other aspect is that Pfizer is working on an Omicron specific vaccine. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And the reason why I say that is it takes time for a vaccine to be developed. And once it's developed, it takes time for it to go through the safety and efficacy testing and then to approval by the FDA. And that's usually a period of at least a year, even at the most hurried fashion. And so if you have a virus that can go from less than 1% to over 99% in less than a month, how can you develop a vaccine that's going to be practical when it takes over a year to get that done? So we have to rely on what we have at this time. We have to rely on certain medications. And from that standpoint, we have just found out that certain of these monoclonal type drugs are not effective. And so we have suspended the use of those for treating COVID because they just don't work. The Army is working on other types of vaccines. They're actually working on a sort of universal vaccine that can affect any of these types of viruses, but that's early in the stages and we don't know where that's going to go. So the basic concern is that we have vaccines that now are effective against Omicron, but I can't say how effective they might be against some of these Omicron subtypes or other variants that go beyond Omicron. I have to say that at this point, because it is so terribly infectious, we have to worry about becoming complacent. And that was one of the difficulties I found with regard to AIDS. People became complacent. They started to feel comfortable with the fact that, well, AIDS is out there, but I'm not going to get it. I'm special. I have this willpower, what have you. And so I'm not going to, and that's what's happening now. So people are wearing masks less. They're converging closely in inside spaces. They're not washing their hands as they used to. So all these things that public health had defined, established, and verified that could be ways in which you could protect yourself are being abandoned. You go to a basketball game and there are thousands of people sitting right on top of each other. How many are wearing masks? You go out to eat and you can't eat with a mask on, so everyone takes their mask off. So what does that do to you? You go to the store and you see very few people wearing masks. So what I'm suggesting is get the vaccine. That is the best way of protecting yourself, as well as do not become complacent and abandon those prescribed safety actions that you can take. And that is to wear a mask. And we now know that the best mask to wear is a N95. It filters out at a much greater ability than other cloth masks and such. Now, one of the questions some people have asked me is, well, I know there's an N95 mask, but there's also a KN95 mask. What's the difference? From the standpoint of filtration, they're both equivalent. From the standpoint of what they are, there's a little difference. The N95 is a mask that has been approved in the United States, and most of them are manufactured in the United States, have been approved for medical use. The KN95 mask has been approved for general use. The filtration rates are the same, but it's just the approval mechanism. And the other fact is the KN95 masks are generally made in China. So those are the differences between two. If you wear an N95 or KN95, they will both give you equal amounts of protection. But I just wanted to make that clarification for you so you understand that. So I really wanted to leave time for questions. And I know there was already a question about the Spanish flu. So let me open the floor for questions at this time.
Well, doctor, this is Jerry. I heard that you were going to say something to us about vitamin D.
Yes. Okay, let's go into that. Let me talk about some of the research that I've been doing. Because I don't have the ability or the money or the equipment to do studies with developing vaccines, and because I know it's going to take such a long time to get those vaccines developed, and it's going to cost millions of dollars, and I just can't pull out of my pocket change. So I've been working on other ways of trying to enhance the body's innate mechanisms to protect itself. We have found out that vitamin D, we used to think vitamin D only had activity with regard to bone health and bone density. But we now understand that vitamin D has a significant role with regard to the immune system. And it actually helps to stimulate the production of cellular immunity, T cells. Now, in our immune system, we have cellular immunity, and that's a certain cell, but we also have humoral immunity. That's certain substances that are produced by certain cells that kill and protect against viruses. When we take a look at the blood from individuals that have had COVID and extract those liquid protectors, we found out that the results weren't as robust as we thought, and we weren't quite sure why. Now we understand why. It appears that the T cell stimulation is the most active part in protecting and fighting the COVID virus. And that is what vitamin D stimulates. The other factor is that what is the most death-causing problem with regard to this infection? It causes something called a cytochrome storm. And that's when the immune system gets so revved up, it starts to attack itself, attack the body itself by mistake. And people develop bad respiratory infection. Those respiratory infections cause the immune system to elicit this cytochrome storm, and the cytochrome storm kills them. Vitamin D has a modulating activity on the immune system. So it has the tendency to prevent cytochrome storm. So it's because of those two methods. It enhances the production of T cells, which are the most effective part of the immune system to fight COVID, and it prevents cytochrome storm, which is the most dangerous aspect of the virus infection. Now, I've looked at vitamin D, and we've looked at a lot of studies, and we found out that if you take a look at people that have adequate amounts of vitamin D, they have the better survival than those individuals that have vitamin D deficiencies. We know that there are two types of vitamin D. There's vitamin D2, which is generally plant-derived, and vitamin D3, which is derived from animals. The D3 seems to be more effective. There have been studies to show that D3 has a longer time of activity. And so D3 is probably the best type of vitamin D to take. And generally, the amount is 1,000 to 2,000 international units. I would not suggest taking over 4,000 international units. That on a daily basis, and that will give your body's immune system a little extra oomph to protect itself. But the most important thing is, if you don't know what your vitamin D level is, find out. Simple blood tests can let you know. And if you're deficient, you need to make sure that you take care of that deficiency. If you don't know, or you don't want to go to the lab, taking a certain amount, 1,000 to 2,000 units a day, certainly not going to harm you, but could help you. The other aspect of my research is looking at what other things are available now that can possibly help us. And we found out that protein can be protective, can help the individual survive. There's a special type of an amino acid type called glutathione. And we've read reports in which, one example was a lady whose son was on the hospital staff, had severe COVID. She was in the ICU. She was essentially near death. They gave her a large amount of glutathione, and within 24 hours, she was out of the ICU. And now, again, that's just anecdotal. That's just one incident. So you can't really base a lot of conclusion from that. You need more studies. But we've also, my group has done studies looking at glutathione in a population of individuals who were hospitalized for surgical purposes. And they were hospitalized in hospitals that had significant COVID populations. And because of that, this hospital was seeing a significant number of individuals coming down with COVID. None of the people that were on the glucagon arm developed COVID, and they were protected. And so from that, we are working on a product that contains vitamin D3 glutathione. The other aspect is, at the University of Florida, there have been some recent research in which they found that a combination of two pretty simple things seems to have some effect in protecting against severe COVID. And that is simple over-the-counter Benadryl plus a milk protein called lactoferrin. So we are also adding lactoferrin to our combination. So vitamin D3, glutathione, and lactoferrin. And the information about the Benadryl and the lactoferrin, that's still undergoing research, but what I've seen is very promising. And because lactoferrin is a safe and simple product, because glutathione is a safe and simple product, because vitamin D is a safe and simple product, they're easy to find, they are inexpensive, and you can go to the store and take it today if it wasn't so icy. But those are some of the things that we've been researching. We understand that vaccines are the first line of therapy, but there's also another line of therapy which says if your body is at its best to protect yourself, then that only adds, it complements the vaccines. And so that's the information I would have about vitamin D. As I said, this other product, we still have additional testing to do, and we're still formulating it, but vitamin D is available at pretty much any pharmacy, any market. It's all over, and it's cheap, and it won't hurt you. So why not? I hope that answers your question.
Yes, doctor, this is Jerry again. I know I have a lot to say, but it's very
Please.
interesting because I've had a lot of, I'm a person, I don't really like to take medicines, and I've had a hard time doing that.
Yes.
And my doctor suggested, about 3 or 4 years ago, to start taking vitamin D3. And I refused it at first because I said, I'm just taking too many pills. And I didn't do it. But then a year later, she just kept pressing. She said, because your vitamin D is low, Jerry. And I finally said, okay. And I'm so glad that because 2 years into, taking the vitamin D, this virus broke out. I got very, very sick in February of 2020. I had throwing up, diarrhea, blah, blah, blah. Since that time, and I had a fever for about 4 or 5 days. After that, I haven't even had a cold. That I know of. I've had a little, stuffiness in the nose, maybe a little bit, or a little phlegm, but nothing like a fever or a cold. And I really credit that for, a doctor really pushing and saying, you take this you're going to take the vitamin D. And she said, and African Americans sometimes lack vitamin D in their systems.
Yes, that's one thing I want to mention. African Americans and the elderly have tendencies to be deficient in vitamin D. African Americans are twice as likely to have deficiencies of vitamin D. And strangely enough, African Americans die 2 times more than non-African Americans from COVID. So let's see, vitamin D twice the deficiency rate and twice the mortality rate. There's kind of a correlation there. And I've been trying to write some articles to suggest this correlation. People want to try to ascribe it to other things, but I think this is a pretty simple follow the dots circumstance. But no, vitamin D is extremely important, and I'm glad that you have taken on to take it. The other thing is seasonal. Vitamin D comes from our absorption of sunlight. And in the summer, in the spring, sometimes in the fall, that's easy. But in the winter, on days like this, when it's gray and cloudy and there's no sunlight, you don't get sun exposure to give you that vitamin D dose. So you need some type of supplementation.
Dr. Fletcher, Karen Villa has a question.
Sure, please.
So I have a lot of grandchildren. Well, I have 4 went on the way. And my daughter is anxiously awaiting the end of the month when Pfizer is to roll out the vaccine for children 6 months and over. Any opinions? She does a lot of research. She works at over at Rutgers, and she does a lot of research and everything, but you sound like you know lots more. So tell me, as a grandma, how do I feel about that?
Well, because a lot of people feel that children don't get COVID, they have said, well, it's no big deal with regard to the vaccine. However, what we have found is with the Omicron, we're seeing ICUs and hospitals filled with pediatric cases, far more pediatric cases recently than we saw during the whole time before Omicron occurred. And so because of that, I say everyone needs to be vaccinated. As long as there's a vaccine that is safe, effective, and approved, take advantage of it. And so that group has been the last group because it's the youngest and most fragile group. And so we have to do a lot of extra observation and testing. And I would say that at the time that it is approved, it will be safe. But think of 2 things. Number one, these children are unprotected and being exposed to a highly contagious virus. Mm-hmm. If they get the virus, because it's highly contagious, they can spread it to other members of the household. And if one of those members of the household has some sort of chronic disease, which renders them immune compromised, they're in terrible shape. And so to protect themselves as well as to protect others, absolutely. The vaccine is so important.
Well, I have, thank you so much. And I have evidence that the children can get the Omicron because my son's kids are 5 and 3. And right now they're both at home because they both have the virus now, and he got it from school. he's doing well. He actually had the first dose because he's 5. So he was able to get the first dose. Unfortunately, before he got the second, he got sick at school, but it is absolutely something. Now, like I say, they're not real sick. Actually, they're, anxiously wanting to go play, but so it is something that can really happen. So, all right. I so appreciate this. Is amazing information. Thank you.
Well, I have twin grandchildren, and not so long ago, they're 10 years old. Not so long ago, they're in New Jersey, as a matter of fact. So not so long ago, my granddaughter came down and had COVID. She had no symptoms whatsoever. She just ran around, I feel fine. Then my grandson developed COVID, and he had a little more difficult time. He felt fatigued and achy, kind of like a mild case of the flu. So yes, young children get it, and young children can spread it.
Dr. Fletcher, I wanted to know if you can speak to the concept of herd immunity and the impact that a vaccine has on our global human population as it relates to vaccines. A lot of people are contentious about it, but in my very limited medical mind, I think if you reduce the number of hosts that the virus can spread to, then you reduce the opportunities for the virus to mutate and get out of control. Can you speak to herd immunity and why that's important?
Absolutely, and that's what herd immunity is. A significant amount of population, generally considered around 80% of the population, has, for whatever reason, either they've had exposure to the virus and have developed an immune system, because the immune system with exposure now recognizes the virus and so therefore can mount a defense against it, or if they've had a vaccine and that artificially does the same thing. It allows the immune system to recognize the virus and mount a defense. So if we don't have 80%, then that 20% can continue to spread it and continue to allow that virus to continue. The problem is that with pandemics, we have to take into consideration that there are areas in the world that have access to medical care and have the infrastructure to develop and distribute vaccines. But there are also areas in this world that have none of that, because we feel that if we're in the United States and everyone in the United States has been vaccinated, we are safe. We are not. Because if there is an area in the world which is unprotected, that is an area in the world in which another variant can develop. And if that variant can oversee or overwork the vaccine, then we're in a world of trouble. So we not only have to think in terms of locally, we have to think globally. And as long as there are areas in the world in which there's not vaccine available, then we have a danger. Remember, as I said, we've had all of these different variants, and only one of them has been a variant that originated in the United States. Hope that answers your question, sir.
It does. A few of us are prior military, and I think about it as being a little warfare monster. If you don't head it off where the origin is, then it'll set up camp and remain dormant until it wants to break out and cause more damage. So I appreciate the answer.
Yeah. Well, being military, you might want to know that the first mandate for vaccines was when George Washington ordered his federal troops to be vaccinated against smallpox because it was killing so many of the individuals. I remember there was a gentleman who asked a question about the Spanish flu and our current flu. And sir, if you would repeat that question, I'd be happy to answer that for you.
That was Ron Patrick. Ron, are you there?
Well, I remember the question. I'll go ahead and answer it anyway. So the difference between this flu and the Spanish flu. Well, As far as the Spanish flu was concerned, we were in a time in which there wasn't the mass media, there wasn't the international travel that we see today. And so that helped it to a certain extent. But unfortunately, because World War I was going on, that did not help. The other aspect is that this was at a time before we had antibiotics. And the people that developed Spanish flu didn't directly die from Spanish flu. They died because the Spanish flu set them up so they developed pneumonia, and it was the pneumonia that killed them. If that happened today, then those people's lives could be spared because we have antibiotics that can defeat pneumonia. Today, we have vaccines and technology that has so many different aspects that can protect us, but we are still limited. Our immune systems can only do so much. Our science can only work so fast. And so we have to rely on science, but we also have to kind of rely on ourselves. And again, we have stipulations, we have ideas of how we can protect ourselves, wear masks, separate, social distance, wash your hands. All of those things still apply, and perhaps even more so because of the highly contagious nature of Omicron. Then again, we have vaccines, we have other methods such as, priming the body to be more immune competent with taking things like vitamin D3. So those are pretty much the differences that we know about Spanish flu and our current circumstance.
I keep thinking about questions I hear when I tell people, why aren't you getting the vaccine? Well, it's not proven. And the problem is all they have to do is look at the statistics, see what the hospitals, including the Dayton hospitals, have written and published, that the majority, almost 99.5% of all the hospital patients due to COVID are unvaccinated people, and those that die are unvaccinated.
Yes, I mean, the statistics are there. And, we're not talking about a population of 100 or 1,000. We're talking about populations of greater than 1 billion. So a number as high as 1 billion kind of seems to be scientifically valid and reputable to me. For someone to, get on the website and say, I have this idea that ice water enemas protect you from COVID. Well, fine, freeze yourself. I want to go with the data, with the information, with the facts. I don't want to go from someone's crazy idea that they decide because they happen to, just have some sort of fetish or what have you.
Thank you so much. Anybody else have any questions?
Doc, I know I'm talking a lot, but I just need,
No.
it's helping me so much. When I was in the military, I went to Kuwait, and before I went to Kuwait, I had to take the anthrax.
Yeah.
And that was a series of 6 shots. Now I had the first 3, but then I had a reaction to it. And so they stopped the shots, they put me on an IV, and they sent me on over to Kuwait, because you know how the military, if you're not dead, you're going.
Yeah.
And that's that's the way it operates. And so, but when I got back, I felt this stuff in my chest, but I don't look my age sometimes, so people don't consider me sick, or they just say, well, you're all right. But I knew something was wrong. And when I went up to Denver, they found that they thought I had cancer, but it came, they found that it was sarcoid
Yes.
in the lungs. And so I finally got my percentages up. It was a battle, but I wasn't sick before I went to, before I had an anthrax shot. And I went there and I came back, and I think my immune system, something happened to it, but they did give me credit for it. They did, because I had a reaction, and they gave me whatever so I wouldn't get sick, and then no more shots. And so some people fear, because they think of, especially I think Black folks, and I hate to keep, bringing up our group, but it's just that we've been experimented on, and sometimes we get these fears and things about shots and people experimenting on us. But the facts were just out here on this. With all these people being sick, and if the Department of Defense goes home, you know, and everybody's working from home, you know, something is wrong, you know, but, and I've had all of my shots and everything, but I'm just saying, I think sometimes people fear because of past history.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's a matter of them and us. So if all of them are not doing something, but they're making us do something, I'm suspicious. But if all of them are doing something,
Yeah,
and
right.
then I'm saying, okay, so there must be something about this that is good.
We're going to have to, it's 1 o'clock now. This was outstanding. I really learned a lot, even though I heard a lot of things before, but I understand them much better. Things I didn't know. Thank you so much.
It is always a great pleasure. Anytime, you know, it's since I've retired, I've wanted to do as much as I can. And now that COVID has come around, I want to try to make sure that people are educated, aware, and understand what is necessary to protect them and their families. And so that's why I'm always happy to speak to groups to let them know what I've learned and what I continue to learn, because COVID is not going to go away. It's going to be here for quite some time. And so we have to get ready for the long haul, you might say.
Thank you.